So the additional property transfer tax is a 15% tax that's levied on the purchase of residential properties located in Metro Vancouver by a foreign national or a foreign corporation. The real innovation of this tax is that it has kind of a dual purpose. Its job is to actually stop foreign purchases of properties in Metro Vancouver. But on the flip side, if it didn't have that large an impact and there still were purchases happening, we'd actually start to raise revenue. And that revenue then would be earmarked to support the building of social housing throughout Metro Vancouver. So in a way, that's why it's a win-win tax, and that's why it's so innovative.
So the Ministry of Finance have been looking at all the various levers we had to control housing prices in Metro Vancouver, and there's sort of two sides. We can try and get at housing supply, we can try and get at housing demand. We picked one of those levers, demand, and then narrowed in on foreign purchasers to try and help reduce house prices.
One of the conditions that surrounded the development of the tax was the fact that it had to be kept very confidential. All tax legislation is usually confidential, but this in particular was kept to a very small number of people who knew what was happening. The tax itself was introduced to have some impact on cooling the market, but we didn't want to affect things too drastically.
There are areas in Vancouver where between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 buyers weren't actually Canadian citizens. Not only were they foreign buyers, but they were tending to spend more money than local buyers. Richmond and Burnaby especially were 20%, 25% depending on the sort of span of time that you look at.
The impact of the introduction of the tax was felt immediately. The percentage of foreign buyers involved in property purchases in Metro Vancouver dropped down to below 2%. And it happened overnight.
This tax has specifically been earmarked to go into the Fund for Social Housing, and I think that's the fact that we can consciously point to something and say, look, that's where that money is going. A lot of the time the tax goes into the general fund, and okay, it builds hospitals and roads and things, but it's nice to point at something.
By the end of this past fiscal, in March 31st, we've collected about $124 million in the additional transfer tax. I think what other governments can learn from how we introduced the tax in British Columbia is that you can have an impact on the market. You can have an impact without actually bottoming the market out completely, but you can also have it so that it will have a significant impact that will buy you time so that you can find other ways in order to affect the market and create a more stable housing environment.